Hello, welcome back. This is Barry Jones, standards-plus-history-academy.com, and we are on to episode 4. And the question, as we always begin with a question, is what about the assassinations before JFK? JFK sort of is the big elephant in the room when we talk about assassinations, but there were 3 prominent assassinations before JFK. And of course, the first of those being James Garfield, and the second being Abraham Lincoln, and the third William McKinley. So we're going to talk about that today and how what the result of those 3 assassinations caused, because it plays a big role in the 4th assassination, which is JFK. Typically, obviously, in America, you're talking about a republic that's been in existence 230 some odd years, and we've only had 4 assassinations total. But at the turn of the century, we'd only had 3. Turn of the last century, actually, but they all came in a short little period of time. After George Washington, you're talking about going back to 1796 and that era. For the next almost 100 years, we didn't have any assassinations. We went a long period of time with at least assassinations that we know of that, we had a couple presidents die in office, and there's some accusations about foul play in the medical field. But as far as these assassinations where somebody takes the life of a president in broad daylight or shoots him or something, wherever there's witnesses, things of that nature, we only had 3 of them, but they happened in a short span. In 1881, pictured here in the top left is the assassination of President Garfield. If you know the backstory on that, Charles Guiteau had been a supporter of James Garfield when he ran for office, with the stipulation that in exchange for his support, James Garfield would give him a plush job after he won the presidency. This is the era of the spoils system, where this was pretty routine. Candidates would offer jobs or some kind of appointment, some perk in exchange for support during a campaign. In this case, James Garfield reneged on his promise, and Charles Guiteau was not happy. He made several efforts to contact Garfield. Garfield started putting him off, telling his secretary not to take an appointment with him, to keep him away from the White House, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a result, Charles Guiteau waited for him at a train station, as you can see here. And as Garfield gets off the train in front of witnesses in broad daylight, walks up and shoots him. And this is the first assassination in American history, as far as the president's concerned. Shocked the American people. And when the American people began learning the details and the reasons behind the assassination, the motive, there was an effort to reform the spoils system, because people started to realize, it was bad when the spoils system was putting incompetent people in positions of authority. But it's gone to another level of bad when the spoils system is the cause of an assassination of that president. So if there was any good that came out of that assassination, it was that the civil service exam, for example, replaced, in a lot of ways, it replaced the appointment power of the president. People had to take civil service exams to qualify themselves for these government jobs, rather than just be picked because they had supported the right candidate. So that was the first assassination, 1881. 4 years later, I mean, you're talking right on the heels of that, John Wilkes famously kills President Lincoln. And of course, pictured down on the bottom left is an artist rendering of what it must have looked like when Wilkes Booth snuck up that back stairway at Ford's Theater 5 days after the Civil War ended. The surrender at Appomattox, President Lincoln is riding about as high. He's never had an opportunity as president to relax. This is his first chance. He's the winner. The Union has defeated the Confederacy. John Wilkes Booth is not happy about that result. He is a Confederate himself, and so he seeks his revenge at Ford's Theater. And we'll talk in a minute about what the plot entailed. But anyway, this is probably our first martyr as far as somebody dying and becoming larger in death than he was in life. Abraham Lincoln. He was what some historians refer to as a tragic hero. He was necessary for the time, which usually means he was needed because there was a crisis. Of course, there was a crisis in America at the time, and Lincoln was the man for that crisis to get us through that, keep the United States united, re and then tragically didn't even enjoy it. So 5 days, as I said, 5 days after the war ends, he's assassinated, and then we're on. And ironically, Booth, in trying to help the South, actually hurts the South because Lincoln was the best friend. This would have been the best friend the South ever had during the Reconstruction era. He wanted to forgive the South. He wanted to make the terms of surrender very generous. He wanted to bring the South back into the Union as quickly as possible. He had been very generous to the South. Instead, Andrew Johnson followed him, and Andrew Johnson was a man who wasn't trusted by either side. He was from Tennessee, so technically he's a Southerner, but because he served with Lincoln, the Southerners and the Democrats didn't trust him. And the Northerners and the Yankees didn't trust him because he's from Tennessee. So he didn't have the gravitas to get through against the radical Republicans in Congress a forgiveness plan for the South. So in other words, the radical Republicans ran roughshod over Johnson, ended up impeaching him and installing a hardliner who was all into a military occupation of the South during Reconstruction. That was Ulysses S. Grant. So he really hurt the region he thought he was helping by killing Lincoln. So that was 1865. And then 36 years later, we have the assassination of President McKinley. This is Leon Zolgaz, who puts a pistol in his right hand, covers it with a bandage, and then when he is ostensibly shaking the hands of President McKinley, he shoots McKinley at point blank range through the bandage. And this was because Leon himself was an anarchist. He didn't believe in a strong central government, and he resented the fact that McKinley was what he, in his words, an imperialist. This is the beginning of the imperialist era in American history when we fought the Spanish-American War. Not in the too distant future, we'll be fighting World War One. The Spanish-American War is going to be a war of conquest for us in the sense that we're going to get something out of it, overseas colonies. Leon thought this is hypocritical of America to be accumulating overseas colonies when we ourselves didn't like being a Britain's colony and fought a war of independence against it. And so, alarmed at the direction America was going, he shot what in his view was the guy who was responsible for that direction, President McKinley. So, though they happened in short order, right, one right after the other, when you take in totality the entire existence of the United States of America, we've only had 4 assassinations total. So you'd have to say they're rare in the American experience. They always have a purpose. They always have a purpose. I've sort of told you what the purpose of the Garfield assassination was, and that was to basically get revenge. This was a personal grudge. The assassin was Guiteau was unhappy with Garfield, felt he had been betrayed. His promise had been double crossed. He didn't get the job he wanted. He wanted to be a diplomat or an ambassador. He didn't get the job that he wanted. He felt like Garfield was ignoring him. And so he says, "You're not. There are some people in this world you can ignore. I am not one of them." And so it became a matter of life and death, and it was more of a personal grudge. That is the exception. That is the rare exception. Most times these have bigger agendas behind them. As far as the John Wilkes Booth assassination of President Lincoln, The motive was to reverse the effects of the Civil War. As I mentioned earlier, the war had just ended 5 days prior. The North had won. And so a Confederate who was very, very familiar with Ford's Theater because he was an actor and he played at that theater all the time. So he knew uh, where Lincoln would be sitting and access to Lincoln's box. And he also understood that if he was seen at the theater, it wouldn't be a big surprise. It wouldn't cause anybody to wonder why he was there. He was an actor. People had seen him at that theater 100 times. And so the idea was to kill Lincoln. He had two Confederates that were supposed to be in this plot with him, and they were supposed to take out the number two and the number three in the executive branch and in the succession plan, and that would bring the number four guy to the presidency. Well, it just so happens that the number four guy was Confederate. And so the idea was to replace Yankees with Confederates. And as such, the new president would reverse the effects of the Civil War and be like the war never happened. So Wilkes Booth saw this as his patriotic duty. He was, after all the fighting, he was going to single-handedly reverse the effects of the war. As we learned and talked about previous, it backfired on him in a couple ways. The first way was that he carried out his part of the plot, but his friends did not. One of them got drunk and shot Seward in the foot, and the other one chickened out altogether. And so instead of killing the top three, they just killed the top one and set up Andrew Johnson's ill-fated presidency. And of course, then the North had even one more reason to come down hard on the South after the war, as if they needed another reason. But that set the stage for Ulysses S. Grant, radical Republicans, and Reconstruction in the South. So you talk about a, a blown opportunity or something that backfired, boomeranged. The third one was to reverse the effect of imperialism. The thinking was if they, you know, Leon Goldhugs thought that the guy responsible for American imperialism was McKinley. And if you take out McKinley, imperialism dies. But that wasn't the case because Teddy Roosevelt was a bigger imperialist than McKinley. So again, the motive backfired. These all started with a purpose. One was personal. The other two had to do with one with policies and an agenda. One to protect his region, the South, and the other to protect America from this dangerous direction of colonizing foreign countries. But in essence, all three backfired. The spoils system, which in essence Charles Guiteau was trying to protect, ended up going away. The Civil War, the effects of the Civil War were not reversed. In fact, they were what Lincoln was planning to do, which was forgive the South. Actually, the opposite happened, and the South chafed under the bondage of Reconstruction, a military occupation, and they were treated like a conquered province instead of part of the United States, which is what Lincoln wanted. They were treated like a conquered province. If you were a Southerner after the war, I would imagine you would curse John Wilkes Booth's name. And then the imperialism did not end with McKinley. They actually accelerated with Teddy Roosevelt. So sometimes the purpose does not succeed. The assassination does not succeed in carrying out the purpose. Interesting, when those three assassinations occurred, Americans were, and the government was rightfully embarrassed. How could we, an aspiring world power, be so negligent in the protection of its king or its president? We didn't have any real bodyguards. As you saw in all three of those pictures, the assassin was able to walk right up to and kill the president at close range. Just having a bodyguard or an elite guard, what we have now as a Secret Service, to keep them from that would make it that much harder to assassinate him. L. Fletcher Prouty, who was alive when JFK was assassinated, he was in a very pivotal position. his title was Chief of Special Operations, but for Black Ops, which is covert operations. But he was basically the liaison between the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the military, and the CIA. And so whenever the CIA needed the military to carry out a covert ops, they contacted L. Fletcher Prouty to set up all the, what they needed to make all the arrangements. So he had intimate knowledge of every covert op that had happened in the CIA's purview using any help from the military in the 50s and in the 60s. He knew it all. And he wrote a book, and in this book, he spells out or lays out the importance of having an elite guard. And the question he asks is, what is it that keeps the king alive? Of course, we would substitute the word president there. In every country, the president would not live if there was not an elite guard. When you control the elite guard of a country, you control the fate of the president. The elite guard will protect the life of the president as long as it agrees with the president. What keeps the president alive is the elite guard. When we get to the part where we're laying out motives and conspirators, this will be a very interesting case study of the Secret Service. But what this illustrates is, at that time anyway, is the need for an elite guard. We didn't have anything. We had nothing. Every other country had some sort of elite guard to protect its leader, and the United States had nothing. So here is the greatest irony of all. The Secret Service was actually signed into a law. It was legislation. It was signed into the law by President Lincoln on April 14th, 1865. That is the same day that he was assassinated. He signed the Secret Service into existence in the morning, and in the evening, he was assassinated. On July 5th, 1865, the Secret Service was formally established. Now, its original purpose was not to protect the president, however. Its original purpose was to protect the country from counterfeiters. We were having, especially on the heels of the Civil War with all Confederate money and things, we were having a real issue with counterfeit money. And so their job, and by the way, it continues to be part of their job, is to protect the nation's currency against counterfeiters. After McKinley's assassination, however, the third assassination in about a 40-year span, Congress said, well, man, we really need an elite guard for our president. We can't have any more assassinations. This is getting ridiculous. It's become an epidemic, and everybody settles their score with the president by killing him. So Congress added presidential protection to the Secret Service responsibilities, and it has been what most people associate the Secret Service with doing is its protection detail of the president. It does other things, as we mentioned, but this has been its main purpose since the assassination of William McKinley. The Romans used to call it the Praetorian Guard. Now, just because you have a Praetorian Guard, or in our case, a Secret Service, does not mean that they will always protect the president. Obviously, we did not have any assassinations after McKinley until JFK. And the natural assumption is, because their job is to protect the president, that if an assassination happens, the Praetorian Guard, or in our case, the Secret Service, had a bad day or made some mistakes or somehow was compromised in a way that jeopardized the life of the president. And their success rate has been so overwhelmingly positive that most people give the Secret Service the benefit of the doubt and say, well, they obviously didn't have anything to do with the assassination. And that is not necessarily the case. And so we'll get into that later. But you can go back to the time of Julius Caesar. He was assassinated by senators, people that were friends of his, and the Praetorian Guard that was supposed to be protecting him stood down and let it happen. So in other words, it was a conspiracy, and it involved, the Praetorian Guard didn't actually have to do the killing. Their role was not to do the killing. Their role was to step aside and allow the senators to do the killing. Well, history will repeat itself in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, when our Secret Service stood aside and for motives that we will discuss later, exposed the president and led him like a lamb to the slaughter. And like any human institution, it is imperfect. It's made up of humans, and humans are corruptible. They can be corrupted. Thus, the institution can be compromised. And so, but just a little history about how it came to be, how it came to pass, and the history of assassinations in America before the assassination of JFK. Thank you. That was episode 4, and we'll look forward to seeing you again for episode 5.